The diner fell silent as FBI agents surrounded the lone Hell's Angel. Just as handcuffs appeared, the quiet waitress stepped forward. Her voice transformed from friendly server to commanding officer in an instant, challenging the agents with military precision that left everyone stunned. The biker remained motionless as she cited legal codes and procedural violations no waitress should know. When the agents retreated, whispers filled the room, but what happened next morning shocked the entire town. The rumble began at dawn, 300 motorcycles approaching in perfect formation. But their purpose wasn't what anyone expected. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you appreciate stories of unsung heroes and unexpected courage, consider subscribing to join our community of viewers who understand that true strength often comes from the most unexpected places. The Pine Haven Diner sat on the outskirts of Ridgewood Junction, a small town where highways intersected but few travelers stopped. It was a modest establishment with vinyl booths, 1970s decor, and a flickering neon open sign that buzzed softly on rainy nights like this one. Despite its aging appearance, locals swore it served the best homemade pie in 3 counties. For exactly 2 years, Rena Hollister had been the night shift waitress. At 35, with blonde hair always secured in a practical bun, and movements so economical they seemed choreographed, she managed to be simultaneously efficient and forgettable. She kept conversations minimal but friendly, the perfect balance of approachable yet invisible, exactly as she preferred. The evening crowd was typical: factory workers from the manufacturing plant on the edge of town, truck drivers passing through on overnight hauls, and a few regulars who preferred dinner without the hassle of cooking. Among them sat Axel Revere, a solitary Hell's Angel in his 60s with a weathered face, silver beard, and Vietnam veteran patches on his leather cut. He occupied the same stool at the counter twice monthly, always ordering black coffee and apple pie, leaving generous tips and causing no trouble, contrary to the intimidating perception others had of his motorcycle club affiliation. Rena moved through the diner with practiced efficiency, anticipating customers' needs before they voiced them. When she refilled Axel's coffee, she did so without asking and placed the mug at a precise angle for easy access, a small detail that suggested military style, attention to positioning that no one had ever noticed or questioned. "Anything else, Axel?" she asked, her voice neutral but not unfriendly. "All good, Rena. Pie's perfect as always," he replied, the corners of his eyes crinkling with a smile that didn't quite reach his mouth. Local Sheriff Donovan Thorne entered for his usual dinner, noticing Axel with subtle disapproval, but maintaining professional distance. He slid into his regular booth, nodding briefly to Rena as she approached with a menu he wouldn't need and the coffee he always ordered. "Evening, Sheriff," she said, placing the steaming mug before him. "Evening, Rena. Busy night?" Same as always. Small tensions existed throughout the diner, other customers giving Axel a wide berth, whispered comments about "that biker trash," which Rena overheard but ignored. As she cleaned a recently vacated booth, her sleeve briefly rode up, revealing a partial glimpse of a tattoo that looked military in nature before she quickly adjusted her uniform. Sheriff Thorne's radio crackled, and he stepped outside to take the call. When he returned minutes later, his demeanor had changed, more alert, his eyes repeatedly darting to Axel. Rena noticed this shift immediately, her own posture subtly changing as she wiped down the counter with more deliberate movements, positioning herself closer to Axel. Through the large windows, black SUVs with government plates pulled into the parking lot. Local customers sensed the tension, conversations quieting as 4 men in tactical gear with FBI windbreakers entered the diner. Sheriff Thorne stepped aside, deferring to federal authority with visible unease. The agents scanned the diner, locked onto Axel, and approached with purpose, hands near their holstered weapons. "Axel Revere," announced the lead agent, a square-jawed man with close-cropped hair and cold eyes. "I'm Special Agent Rafferty. We have a federal warrant for your arrest in connection with interstate trafficking." Customers recoiled in shock, some filming with phones, others sliding out of nearby booths. Axel remained seated, setting down his fork with deliberate calm. "There must be some mistake," he said quietly. As Rafferty moved to handcuff Axel, Rena stepped between them with startling precision, a move that appeared casual but placed her exactly where she could obstruct their approach. "I'll need to see that warrant," she said, her voice transformed, commanding, confident, unmistakably authoritative. Rafferty, surprised by the interruption, dismissed her with a glance. "Stand aside, ma'am. This doesn't concern you." "Actually, it does," Rena countered, holding her ground. "As a citizen witnessing what appears to be a procedurally questionable arrest, I have concerns." Rafferty, visibly irritated, flashed the paperwork. "Federal warrant. Now step aside." Rena scanned the document with expert eyes, immediately identifying problems. This warrant cites involvement in activities on March 4th, 7 in Phoenix. Axel has been here every one of those evenings. Her language had shifted to include legal terminology and procedural knowledge no waitress should possess. Sheriff Thorne, watching from nearby, noticed Rena's stance had completely changed, feet positioned in a balanced combat-ready posture, hands precisely placed for both defense and potential action. "We have solid intelligence linking him to a trafficking operation," Agent Rafferty insisted, his frustration growing. "Your intelligence is flawed," Rena countered, citing specific procedural requirements for interstate warrants that the agents hadn't followed. "This man has documented alibis for the dates in question. I witnessed his presence here personally." One agent moved to physically remove her, but Rena shifted her weight slightly, a minimal movement that caused him to hesitate, recognizing a trained fighter's preparedness. "You're making a serious mistake," she stated, her voice carrying authority that silenced the entire diner. She made direct eye contact with Rafferty, speaking in a lower tone that only he and nearby agents could hear. "Sierra Delta 447, confirm your intel before you create an international incident." The code phrase caused visible shock among the agents who exchanged uncertain glances. Agent Rafferty, clearly thrown off balance, conferred quietly with his team before announcing, "We'll be reviewing our information and returning if necessary." As the agents retreated, Rena returned to wiping down the counter as if nothing unusual had happened, but every customer stared in stunned silence. Axel caught her eye briefly, a silent question in his expression that Rena answered with the slightest nod. An exchange between two people who recognized something in each other that civilians wouldn't understand. Sheriff Thorne approached her as the FBI vehicles pulled away. "What just happened here, Rena?" "Just making sure due process is followed, Sheriff," she replied, her voice once again that of a simple waitress, though they both knew something fundamental had changed. The diner slowly returned to normal operations, but the atmosphere remained charged. Customers whispered among themselves, shooting curious glances at both Rena and Axel. Sheriff Thorne lingered longer than usual, nursing his coffee and watching Rena with newfound interest and uncertainty. As closing time approached, only Sheriff Thorne and Axel remained. Rena began her usual cleanup routine, methodically wiping tables and refilling condiments for the morning shift. "I've been coming here twice a month for a year," Axel finally said, breaking the silence. "Never knew I was sitting across from someone who understood the code." Rena continued working without looking up. "Sometimes it's better that way." Sheriff Thorne leaned forward. "That FBI agent recognized whatever you said to him. Military code?" "Something like that," she acknowledged vaguely. "I served 2 tours with the Marines," Thorne pressed, "but I've never heard that particular code phrase." "You wouldn't have," Rena replied simply. The sheriff studied her for a long moment. "I'm going to make some calls tonight. Not because I don't trust you, but because I need to understand what's happening in my town." "Your prerogative, Sheriff," Rena said. "Just be careful which channels you use. Some questions draw unwanted attention." Axel stood, leaving his usual generous tip. "Might not be back for a while. Best to keep moving until this blows over." "They'll be watching the highways," Rena warned, "and they rarely make the same mistake twice." "Got friends coming," Axel replied cryptically. "Should be here by morning." "I'll be fine." As Axel left, Sheriff Thorne remained, watching Rena lock up and prepare to close. "I've known you for 2 years," he said thoughtfully. "Or thought I did." "You know exactly who I am, Sheriff," she replied. "A waitress who makes good coffee and better pie. And apparently speaks in military code and can intimidate federal agents," he added. Rena finally paused her work, meeting his gaze directly. "Everyone has a past. Some are just more complicated than others." "Whatever's coming," Thorne said seriously, "I need to know if my town is in danger." "The only danger was the FBI attempting to arrest an innocent man," she assured him. As for what's coming, I suspect we'll all find out in the morning. After the sheriff left, Rena completed her closing duties with the same efficiency she always showed. But as she walked to her modest apartment 3 blocks away, her posture and movements subtly changed, the practiced civilian disguise giving way to the military bearing she had suppressed for 2 years. Her eyes constantly scanned her surroundings, alert for surveillance or pursuit, a habit ingrained through years of high-risk operations. Inside her sparsely furnished apartment, Rena pulled a weathered go-bag from beneath her bed and checked its contents, ready for swift departure if necessary. She hadn't survived this long by failing to prepare for contingencies. But something told her running wouldn't be necessary this time. For the first time in years, she removed the photograph hidden in the lining of the bag, a faded image showing her younger self in tactical gear, standing with a group of rescued men in a mountainous landscape. She studied the faces, remembering each one, wondering if Axel's cryptic reference to "friends coming" meant what she suspected. If so, Ridgewood Junction was about to witness something unprecedented. And after 2 years of anonymity, Lieutenant Commander Rena Hollister would finally step back into the light, for better or worse. Dawn broke over Ridgewood Junction, news of the previous night's confrontation having spread throughout the small town. Sheriff Thorne sat in his patrol car outside the diner, which hadn't opened yet, reviewing a classified military file on his laptop. The redacted service record of Lieutenant Commander Rena Hollister, former leader of Naval Special Warfare's classified, all-female SEAL unit codenamed Rogue Tide. The file revealed fragments of an unauthorized extraction mission in Afghanistan 3 years earlier, where Rena's unit rescued 13 American veterans captured by insurgents while on a charity motorcycle ride. The mission was successful, but subsequently disavowed by U.S. intelligence agencies, leading to the disbanding of the unit and redaction of their service records. Sheriff Thorne had spent the night calling in favors from his Marine Corps days, piecing together a story that official channels had tried to bury. His concentration was broken by a distant rumble that grew steadily louder. On the horizon, a massive formation of motorcycles approached, not a handful, not a dozen, but hundreds of riders in disciplined formation. Townspeople emerged from businesses, some fearful, others curious, many filming with phones as 300 Hells Angels thundered down Main Street. The motorcycle procession, led by National Hells Angels President Magnus Calloway, surrounded the diner in a protective circle, their formation revealing military-like precision. Sheriff Thorne called for backup, but remained in his vehicle, vastly outnumbered and uncertain of their intentions. He watched as Rena arrived for her shift, freezing at the sight of the assembled bikers. Magnus dismounted, a towering figure with a full gray beard and commanding presence. He approached her with deliberate steps and rendered a perfect military salute, a gesture immediately repeated by every veteran among the bikers. "Lieutenant Commander Hollister," he announced formally, "3 years ago, you and your team came for us when our government abandoned us. Today, we return the favor." From his inside pocket, Magnus retrieved a leather portfolio containing documentation proving Axel's innocence, surveillance footage, time-stamped photos, and signed affidavits showing his presence in Ridgewood during the alleged crimes. Magnus then presented Rena with a worn photograph showing a younger version of herself in tactical gear, standing with 13 rescued American bikers in a mountainous setting, concrete proof of a mission that officially never happened. Sheriff Thorne approached, having witnessed the exchange, and examined the evidence of Axel's innocence. They were on a charity ride delivering medical supplies to remote villages when they were captured, Rena explained, finally acknowledging her past. Our intelligence agencies wouldn't authorize a rescue because the mission wasn't officially sanctioned. We went anyway. Magnus elaborated. The government disavowed the mission, disbanded her unit, and threatened us all with prosecution if we ever spoke about it. They erased her service record rather than admit American citizens had been abandoned. The townspeople, who had feared violence, witnessed instead an extraordinary demonstration of honor and loyalty, completely transforming their perception of both the bikers and the quiet waitress. Sheriff Thorne, faced with irrefutable evidence, removed his badge and formally saluted Rena. "Lieutenant Commander, it appears I've been enforcing the wrong justice. Rather than leaving after the revelation, the 300 Hells Angels unloaded tools and materials from support vehicles that had followed their procession. "We heard this place was struggling to stay open," Magnus explained. "Figured we owed you more than just clearing Axel's name." With military-grade efficiency and organization, teams of bikers began renovating the dilapidated diner, replacing the leaking roof, repairing broken fixtures, upgrading the kitchen, and installing new flooring. The transformation was methodical and precise, revealing many of the bikers to be skilled tradesmen, engineers, and contractors in their civilian lives. Townspeople, initially watching from a fearful distance, gradually approached, first bringing water and refreshments to the working bikers, then offering to help with the renovation. By mid-afternoon, the local news had arrived, initially drawn by reports of hundreds of Hell's Angels invading town, but instead documenting the extraordinary renovation and the story behind it. The reporter, a young woman named Alara Jenkins, approached Rena for an interview. "People are calling you a hero," she said, microphone extended. Rena shook her head. "The heroes are the ones who showed up today, and the women who served with me, who still can't acknowledge their service publicly." "Can you tell us about the rescue mission?" Alara pressed. "What I can tell you is that when American citizens needed help, a team answered that call," Rena replied carefully. "Sometimes the right action and the authorized action aren't the same thing." As the renovation continued, Agent Rafferty returned, alone this time, and in a standard suit rather than tactical gear. He approached Rena with visible discomfort. "Lieutenant Commander Hollister," he began formally, "I've been instructed to inform you that the charges against Axel Revere have been dropped. The Bureau acknowledges a case of mistaken identity." "Is that all?" Rena asked, her expression neutral, but her eyes challenging. Rafferty glanced around at the bikers, townspeople, and news cameras before continuing reluctantly, "and to extend an official apology for the procedural irregularities last night." "Apology accepted," she replied simply. "I trust your intelligence will be more thoroughly vetted in the future." The agent hesitated, then added in a lower voice, "For what it's worth, some of us believe your team should have received commendations, not disavowal. What happened wasn't right." Rena's expression softened slightly. "We didn't do it for commendations." As Rafferty departed, Sheriff Thorne approached with a small group of town council members. "The town wants to do something to thank you," he explained, "both for last night and for your service." "That's not necessary," Rena began, but the elderly council president interrupted. "It may not be necessary, but it's right," she insisted. "Ridgewood Junction hasn't always been welcoming to outsiders, military or otherwise. It's time we change that." Throughout the day, more townspeople arrived, bringing food, drinks, and additional supplies for the renovation. What had begun as a show of solidarity between bikers and a former SEAL evolved into a community transformation with longtime residents working alongside the leather-clad visitors, sharing stories and discovering common ground. As the sun began to set, Magnus gathered the bikers for a brief ceremony. "Brothers!" he called out, his voice carrying across the crowded parking lot. 3 years ago, our government left us for dead in hostile territory. They said a rescue was impossible. They said no one was coming for us." The bikers nodded grimly, many of them veterans who understood all too well how political considerations could override duty to those who served. But Lieutenant Commander Hollister and her team refused to accept that. They came for us, against orders, risking their careers and their lives because they believed no Americans should be left behind enemy lines. Magnus turned to Rena, who stood quietly at the edge of the gathering. "They took your career from you. They took your reputation. They tried to erase what you did, but they couldn't take this." He gestured to the assembled crowd. "They couldn't break the bond formed when warriors stand together." One by one, the 13 men who had been rescued in Afghanistan stepped forward, forming a line facing Rena. Without command or signal, they simultaneously rendered perfect military salutes, holding them until Rena, visibly moved despite her composure, returned the gesture. The bikers who hadn't been part of the rescue mission followed suit, joined by Sheriff Thorne, then by veterans among the townspeople, until nearly half the assembled crowd stood at attention, saluting not just Rena, but what she represented, the principle that service transcends bureaucracy and loyalty outweighs political expediency. As the salutes were lowered, Sheriff Thorne addressed the gathering. 3 years ago, Lieutenant Commander Hollister and her team were punished for doing the right thing. Today, we acknowledge their service and their sacrifice. He turned to Rena. I don't have the authority to restore what was taken from you, but I can ensure that Ridgewood Junction becomes a place where you and others like you are honored rather than hidden. The ceremony concluded as dusk fell, the renovated diner glowing with new lights against the darkening sky. Magnus prepared to lead his brothers back to the highway, but not before making one final announcement. Pine Haven Diner is now an official stop on the Veterans Ride for Honor, he declared. Every year, riders from clubs across the country will pass through Ridgewood Junction, remembering what happened here and ensuring this story is never forgotten. As the bikers mounted their motorcycles, the rumble of engines once again filling the night, Rena stood at the entrance of the transformed diner, no longer hiding who she was, but not quite ready to fully reclaim her former identity either. The past day had changed everything, forcing her into the light after years of deliberate invisibility. What that meant for her future remained uncertain. Sheriff Thorne joined her, watching the procession of motorcycles disappear down the highway. "What will you do now?" he asked, "now that everyone knows?" "I'm still figuring that out," she admitted. "For 2 years, all I wanted was to disappear, to forget what happened and move on. And now?" Rena considered the question, looking back at the diner where townspeople were still gathered, talking excitedly about the day's events and what it meant for their community. "Now, I think maybe there's value in being seen," she said finally. "Not just for me, but for the others, the women who served with me who still can't tell their stories." "You could be their voice," Thorne suggested. "Maybe," Rena agreed. "But first, we have a diner to run. People will want coffee in the morning, whether I'm a waitress or a former SEAL." As the last of the townsfolk departed and the diner fell quiet, Rena walked through the renovated space, taking in the transformation. New floors, fresh paint, repaired fixtures, modern equipment in the kitchen, all completed in a single day by men society had taught her to fear before she came to know them as brothers in arms. On the wall near the entrance, the bikers had mounted a simple plaque, in honor of those who refused to leave anyone behind, even when ordered to stand down. Beneath these words was the emblem of Rogue Tide, the classified unit that officially never existed, but whose actions had forever changed the lives of 13 men and their families. Rena traced the emblem with her fingers, remembering the women who had served alongside her, their faces, their courage, their unwavering determination. Some had found new paths after their disavowal, while others still struggled with the injustice of having their service erased. For all of them, today represented a small measure of vindication. Outside, Sheriff Thorne had arranged for deputies to keep watch overnight, uncertain whether the FBI or other government agencies might attempt to reassert control over a situation that had quickly escaped their grasp. But as he drove past on his final patrol of the night, he saw Rena sitting alone at the counter, her posture once again that of a simple waitress rather than a decorated officer. Some transitions couldn't be rushed, he realized. After years of hiding her identity, Rena would need time to reconcile her past with whatever future she chose to embrace. The important thing was that now, for the first time since arriving in Ridgewood Junction, she had the freedom to make that choice. 3 months later, Pine Haven Diner had been renamed Rogue Tide Diner, now co-owned by Rena and the original owner, who had been on the verge of closing before the renovation. The walls displayed both military memorabilia and tasteful motorcycle tributes, honoring dual aspects of service and brotherhood. Every first Sunday of the month, the diner hosted a charity breakfast benefiting veterans' services, drawing riders from multiple clubs and veterans from all branches of service. What had once been a struggling roadside establishment was now a destination, known not just for its pie but for the extraordinary story behind its transformation. Rena no longer hid her military bearing, though she still served coffee with the same quiet efficiency, now recognized and respected for both her past heroism and present dignity. Sheriff Thorne, inspired by Rena's moral courage, had established a veterans advocacy office within the local police department, ensuring those who served were protected rather than persecuted. He had become a regular at the diner, often sitting with Axel and other bikers, building bridges between law enforcement and communities traditionally at odds. On this particular morning, a young woman in a crisp navy uniform entered the diner, drawing curious glances from the regulars. She waited until the breakfast rush subsided before approaching Rena at the counter. "Lieutenant Commander Hollister?" she asked quietly. "I'm Ensign Zara Okafor. I've been hoping to meet you." Rena studied the young officer with a measured gaze. "What can I do for you, Ensign?" "They've reopened the program," Zara told her privately. "Your mission wasn't just declassified. It's now used as a case study in advanced extraction techniques at Coronado." Rena's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps vindication. "And you're part of this program?" Zara nodded. "The first new class. They told us what your team accomplished, how you planned the impossible and executed it perfectly, how you refused to abandon Americans when bureaucracy got in the way." Before Rena could respond, the rumble of motorcycles announced the arrival of Magnus and several original Hells Angels for their monthly visit. The bikers were greeted not as outsiders, but as valued members of the community, regular customers calling out welcomes as they entered. As Rena served coffee to both the young naval officer and the aged bikers, the symbolism was lost on no one, a legacy passing between generations, a circle of service and honor completing itself in an unexpected place. Magnus settled at the counter, nodding respectfully to Ensign Okafor. "The Navy's finally doing right by you?" "Seems that way," Rena replied, "though I suspect it has more to do with the publicity than any real change of heart." "Sometimes that's how change happens," he said with a knowing smile. "You force their hand." The diner door opened again, admitting a Pentagon official in full dress uniform, carrying a small case. The buzz of conversation dimmed as he approached the counter. "Lieutenant Commander Rena Hollister," he announced formally. "On behalf of the Secretary of the Navy and a grateful nation, I am authorized to present you with the decorations earned by you and your team during Operation Silent." Harbor. A hush fell over the diner as he opened the case to reveal the medals Rena and her unit had been denied 3 years earlier, a formal acknowledgement of service long overdue. Rather than keeping the medals, Rena placed them in a display case in the diner alongside the worn photograph from Afghanistan, honoring not just her service but the bond formed between rescuers and rescued. "These belong to my entire team," she stated clearly, "and to the mission we believed in." After the ceremony, as regular service resumed, Magnus beckoned Rena outside, where his fellow club members had gathered around something covered with a tarp. "We've been working on this for months," he said, gesturing for the tarp to be removed. Beneath it sat a custom-made motorcycle, built collaboratively by club members across the country, a vehicle designed specifically for her, combining military precision with biker craftsmanship. Its midnight blue paint job bore the subtle emblem of Rogue Tide along the fuel tank. "Every part was crafted by someone you saved or by those who respect what you stand for," Magnus explained. "It's yours, if you want it." For the first time since arriving in Ridgewood Junction, Rena's composure broke slightly, genuine emotion crossing her face. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "Just ride with us sometime." Later that afternoon, Rena took her first ride, leading a formation of bikers and veterans through town. Sheriff Thorne stood on the sidewalk, saluting their passing, a symbol of authority now aligned with justice rather than blind obedience to flawed systems. As they crested the hill overlooking Ridgewood Junction, Rena pulled to the side, letting the others pass as she took in the view of the town that had become her home after years of operating in shadows. Ensign Okafor pulled up beside her. "The new commander asked me to deliver a message," she said. "Some missions never really end." Rena nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. "Tell her I know. And that the team is always ready." The message carried implications that went beyond simple acknowledgement. Somewhere, the other members of Rogue Tide were watching what had happened in Ridgewood Junction, perhaps preparing for their own moments of recognition, or perhaps continuing to serve in ways the public would never know. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the highway, Rena rejoined the formation of riders, no longer hiding, no longer alone, part of something that transcended both military service and civilian life. A community built on recognition of what truly matters, not blind obedience to authority, but unwavering loyalty to those who stand beside you when it counts. The procession returned to the diner, where dozens of American flags now lined the entrance, honoring those whose service went unrecognized, but whose loyalty to each other never wavered. Inside, the photographs on the wall told a story of invisible heroes, disavowed missions, and the power of showing up when it matters most. A week later, a yellow school bus pulled up outside the Rogue Tide diner. Students from Ridgewood High School filed out, part of a new educational program about military service and civic responsibility. Rena had initially been hesitant about becoming a teaching resource, but Sheriff Thorne had convinced her that the students needed to hear real stories from real veterans, especially those whose experiences defied conventional narratives. These kids grow up thinking military service is all about following orders and staying in line, he had argued. They need to understand that sometimes the greatest service comes from knowing when to question authority, when loyalty to your fellow Americans matters more than protocol. As the students settled into their seats, Rena felt a familiar tension, the instinctive discomfort of standing in the spotlight after years of deliberate invisibility. But as she began to speak, sharing carefully declassified aspects of her service while protecting operational details that remained sensitive, she found an unexpected sense of purpose. The most important lesson I learned, she told them, wasn't about tactics or weapons or even courage under fire. It was about making hard choices when the rules and the right thing aren't the same, and being willing to accept the consequences of those choices. One student raised her hand. Do you regret it? Losing your career to save those men? Rena considered the question, looking around the diner that had become both her home and a symbol of unexpected community. I regret that my team wasn't recognized for their courage. I regret that we had to choose between orders and our duty as we understood it. But saving those men? Never. Not for a second. After the students departed, Rena found a small envelope left on the counter. Inside was a handwritten letter from a teenage girl who hadn't spoken during the presentation. My mother served too. She won't talk about where or what she did, but sometimes she wakes up screaming. After today, I think maybe I understand a little better why she can't talk about it. Thank you for showing me that being silent doesn't always mean being broken. The note reinforced what Rena had begun to understand since the day 300 bikers had transformed her life, that her story mattered not just for her own sake, but for all those who continued to serve in silence, whose experiences might never be publicly acknowledged. Over the following months, Rogue Tide Diner became more than just a restaurant. It evolved into an unofficial gathering place for veterans from across the country, especially those whose service fell into classified or disavowed categories. They came quietly, often alone, drawn by word of mouth, and the promise of a space where they would be understood without explanation. Rena recognized them instantly, not by their faces or their words, but by the way they carried themselves, the careful positioning when seated, the constant awareness of exits and sight lines, the haunted look that came from carrying secrets that couldn't be shared even with family. She never pressed for details, offering instead the simple recognition that their service mattered, whether officially acknowledged or deliberately erased. For many, it was the first time they had been truly seen since returning to civilian life. One evening, after closing, Rena received an unexpected visitor, Captain Lorelei Blackburn, the former commanding officer who had authorized the unsanctioned rescue mission that ended both their naval careers. I see you found a way to serve even without the uniform, Blackburn observed, looking around the diner with its walls of memories and recognition. Different kind of service, Rena acknowledged, but it matters. It always did, Blackburn agreed. That's what they never understood, that the mission wasn't about defying orders. It was about the fundamental promise we make to those who serve, that we don't leave our people behind enemy lines. They talked late into the night, two officers who had sacrificed everything for principles that transcended regulations, finding in each other's company the unique understanding that can only exist between those who have faced the same impossible choices. Before leaving, Blackburn placed a small object on the counter, a challenge coin bearing the emblem of Rogue Tide. The others asked me to give you this. They're scattered now, some still serving under different commands, others finding their way as civilians. But we all carry this, a reminder that we did the right thing, no matter what the official record says. As Rena held the coin, feeling its weight and the etched surface that connected her to women she had trained with, fought beside, and ultimately lost her career. Protecting, she understood that her journey had come full circle. What had begun as an act of defiance had become a foundation for a different kind of community, one built on shared values rather than shared geography or background. The next morning, as she prepared to open the diner for the day's business, Rena paused at the window, watching as riders from a dozen different motorcycle clubs converge on the parking lot, coming together for the monthly charity breakfast. Among them were veterans and civilians, law enforcement and former outlaws, all united by the story that had transformed not just a diner, but an entire town's understanding of service and sacrifice. As she turned the sign from closed to open, Rena reflected that some missions never truly end. They simply evolve into new forms of service. And sometimes, the most powerful act of service is simply bearing witness, acknowledging those whose courage and sacrifice might otherwise remain invisible. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Someone whose greatest achievements remained hidden from the world.